It's my opinion that the most advanced, most evolved people are the most loving, genuinely loving people.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of I Am Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality to demystify spirituality. And I'm so excited about today's guest and the topic. How are you doing today, Miss Francis?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Doing super wonderful. So, before we get started, just for the audience, tell us a bit about yourself.
All right, I am a certified hypnotherapist, emotional freedom technique therapist, and Reiki therapist. And I have a private and group practice in Los Angeles. And I also sometimes teach online classes or, in-person classes. And I really very much enjoy it. I'm also an author. I've just finished my third book.
Oh, awesome. Well, we have to dive into your books because, like, I love when the guests come on and they have written multiple books. I find that the audience loves finding the guests to read about their books. But one thing I really want to dive in today is you talk a lot about finding hope after loss. Let's talk about that.
Okay. When somebody, especially in a situation where somebody's loved one has passed away, or maybe even more than one loved one has passed away, it can be very difficult to get back to a place where you feel it's all right to be happy. It's all right to take good care of yourself. It's often people who are left behind when somebody dies feel guilt. They feel a lot of guilt, and it can be very difficult to find the hope to live a good life again, the way you maybe did before your loved one passed away. And of course, having a loved one pass away is not the only thing that triggers guilt, but that's the subject of my third book and the way that I wrote the majority of it. And using hypnotherapy and emotional freedom technique, especially those two, can be very helpful in helping a person who has lost a loved one to feel hope again.
Mm. So one thing I want to dive into with that is a lot of times when people do have loss in their lives, and I like what you said about loss doesn't necessarily mean that you had the loss of a loved one. But when we do face loss and then we go about our lives, it's usually not a instant drop in energy or an instant drop in hopelessness. It's almost like a downward spiral, right?
Yeah, sometimes it takes a while to get used to it, especially if the death was sudden and unexpected. It takes some time. You think you've accepted it, but it's so difficult to get used to the concept that this person who's been in your life all this time, or for quite some time, is no longer in your life. And especially for people who are not spiritual or religious, they definitely feel the loss a lot more than people who are willing to be who do feel more spiritual, more religious. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes it takes a while after the immediate loss before the person begins to really realize exactly what has happened.
So, as a Reiki specialist and a Reiki therapist, do you feel the energy is different around somebody who has experienced this loss and has difficulty letting go?
Yes, very much. Yes. People who are not in that position tend to have a much more up sort of energy. And people who are in that position, it's almost like the energy has been vacuumed out of them or something. They feel like a lot of people will say grief is the price of love, which with which I agree, but that's not a very hopeful statement to make. And I think a lot of times when somebody has lost a loved one, their energy just does decline and they start to feel a lot more hopeless than hopeful.
Interesting. Grief is the cost of love. I've never heard that. So, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that because we love, we're going to lose that love eventually?
Because we are loving creatures, at some point we will probably experience grief. And when somebody is in the moment of feeling grief, often it feels very unfair. They might be asking, why me? Why did this happen to me? Especially if the person who died suddenly, unexpectedly, or they were not of an age that the survivors believe they should have been dying. the person left behind might be feeling like, why did this happen to me? And it can be very difficult for them to feel like they do want to enjoy their lives and to go on with their lives and to know that it's okay to be happy again.
When you say that the survivors believe that they were probably taken away too soon, what do you mean by that? Are you saying more so that when we go, it is our time, that it's just difficult for us to let go?
By survivors, the people who were left in the wake of somebody dying. And that I'm certainly not in a position to say whether we die at the time that we are meant to die. I happen to believe that. I happen to believe that before we ever come to the planet, we have a meeting with our creator and we decide every single detail of our lives, even the painful parts. And we decide what's going to teach us because I believe life is a lesson, it's a classroom, and we're all students of life, right? So we choose every single detail that's going to help us in our evolution, in our more metaphysical evolution, to become the people that we are meant to be.
Mm. So when we're looking at I love that concept, honestly. So when we're looking at, let's call them contracts, I think a lot of people are familiar with the term contracts. When we're looking at the life contracts that we make before this life, why is it that some people seem to have these really tough and challenging lives?
I think, as I began to allude to earlier, I think it's because we are assigned, as a student, we're assigned things to learn. And it's my opinion that the most advanced, most evolved people are the most loving, genuinely loving people. And when we come here to Earth, sometimes we might choose details that make for what somehow they, even if they're more difficult for us, they make it easier for us to learn to love. Maybe when we live a very difficult life, we say, I don't like the way it felt for me to experience the difficulty. So what I'm going to do is be as loving as I can to you to see if there's any way that I can help you have a less difficult life, to enjoy your life a little bit more.
Mm. Ooh, that definitely hints on multiple lives and reincarnation and going through the life cycle here on Earth specifically. And you also mentioned earlier about this all being a part of our spiritual ascension process. So at what point would you say, and I know there's no like real clear answer, right? At what point would you say we spent enough time in this life as humans on Earth and then it's time for our souls to ascend? And then what is that ascension?
There are some people who believes that you always come back. There is no end to reincarnation. I happen to believe that when you've learned the lesson, which in my opinion is to be as loving as you possibly can, despite the difficulty despite the difficulty you might experience in loving certain people or certain other existing beings, it can be very difficult sometimes to love people. But when you get to a point where you can always wish someone well, even if they maybe grate on your nerves or something like that, but you always wish them well and you release them with genuinely good intentions. I think that is when you have learned the lessons. You're now getting straight A's as a student. And what the ascension looks like, in my belief, it's we are all one. You and I are in different locations. You have a different body than I do. We certainly don't look alike at all. But I believe that we share a soul. And I believe that we share the soul with everybody. So when you leave this body behind, A Course in Miracles, they say you gently lay your body aside. They don't speak of death.
Mm.
They say, and then you remember who you are. You remember that you are this one soul, that in reality, you were never separate. Nobody was better than anybody else. Nobody was worse than anybody else. We are one, and that is. And if you notice in life, how many things bring you joy by joining? If you're a musician and you get to spend time with other musicians and create, or any other kind of art, dance, painting, whatever it may be, writing, it's joyful. I'm even getting chills even talking about this. When you join with other people for a good cause, you feel so good. And I believe that's because we are actually one soul.
Oh, wow. So Is it because of that sense of unity, that sense of warmth when we're connected with all each other, that when we lose that, maybe a piece of it falls off or someone dies or maybe for whatever reason you're a pianist and you can't play anymore, you get that sense of loss. Is that why we feel it so heavily and so deeply?
Oh, definitely. I think so. I think especially in the case of something, someone or something that you had on a regular basis in your life, and then that someone or something is no longer alive, is no longer around, like the two instances you mentioned, a loss, a person, a loved one who has died, or the loss of a talent or something like that. It can be very jarring to adjust to that new lifestyle. But I do believe that if you're willing to be happy again and to find joy perhaps in something else, to be honest about what you're experiencing and maybe even know whom to avoid because they might say the wrong things or what to be drawn toward because it'll make you happy again. I think that is very much possible if we're willing to allow it.
Mhm. But for instance, what's the lesson in that? If we come here to learn and to grow, what's the lesson? And we would have signed a contract saying we know this is gonna happen. We know we're gonna lose it. Where's the lesson?
I think the lesson may be in losing it and continuing to be essentially the person that you were before the loss occurred. So if you were a loving person and your favorite person that you loved in this planet has died, yes, it's difficult because we are bodies and we tend to think that we're these humans and our loved ones are these humans, that when they are no longer there with you, that it feels at first very jarring and very negative. But when you allow yourself to search for the positive and to experience the positive, and to know that, especially in that situation where a loved one has died, the best way to honor your loved one is to take good care of yourself and to seek more happiness. I think when we allow that, it all feels much better than when we just go, oh, have this terrible thing happened and I'm miserable over it, or that kind of thing.
How do you help people to find new love in their life? To not necessarily replace the love that they lost, but to gain a deeper appreciation to what they have.
One of the things I use frequently is emotional freedom technique. Emotional freedom technique is based on the same ancient Eastern healing system as acupuncture. And that belief system is that we have within our bodies a series of meridians, like your veins, but these meridians transport your life energy. And even if you think you know what has caused a problem or some other negative emotion in your life, it's really always because there's a blockage along these meridians. And fortunately, if you, while you're talking about the problem, if you tap on certain endpoints, like with acupuncture, they would put needles, but instead of using needles, you tap with your fingers on it. It releases the blockage and it allows your life energy to flow better. And people often have a very positive experience from using emotional freedom technique. As for moving on and or finding something to replace it, I always allow, especially if it's a person grieving the loss of a loved one, always allow them as much time as they feel they need and send them good energy so that they are able to find things about which to be happy. I also recommend to a lot of my clients to do a gratitude journal.
Oh, I love gratitude journals. Honestly, that's something that really helped me when I was just growing and trying to get rid of some things about myself and my past that I had difficulty letting go of. But when you mentioned, I forgot what I was going to say. So we were talking about the meridians and the energy channels, acupuncture, there's acupressure. Is this a physical thing or are we talking more energetically?
It's both. You're doing a physical thing in order to get your life energy flowing properly.
Mm.
Even if you have, say, for example, back in 2011, I fell off of my bicycle and I broke my elbow. And so I would have gone around at the time, I would have said, I broke my elbow because I fell off my bicycle onto my elbow. But in reality, the thing is, I fell off of a bicycle that I was riding to train to do a fundraising ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And we were going to have to be doing a lot of riding in traffic with cars. And I didn't even realize consciously how terrified I was of doing that ride. And what I did by falling off of the bicycle, yes, I broke my elbow, but I made it so that I couldn't go through with the ride because the ride was 5 weeks after that. And my surgeon told me I couldn't ride again for 3 months. So it seems like the problem was that I fell off of the bicycle and I broke the elbow, but really it was an emotional thing. And anytime there's a problem anywhere in your life, regardless of what it is, it's really always because there's a blockage somewhere along and your life energy is not flowing the way it should or the way it's best for you.
Interesting. So you're saying that even our subconscious feelings or thoughts about things affect our physical reality?
Especially your subconscious. Your subconscious mind is the vast majority of your mind. Some people say it's close to 90%, some people say it's 95%. And subconscious means all of what happens in it is automatic. It's unknown to us. We're just living off of the positives and negatives that we absorbed when we were born, from the time we were born until we were like 6 years old or so. And we don't even realize we developed this script. So it's especially your subconscious mind. The more you can become mindful of your conscious mind, where your reason, your logic, your analytical ability, your willpower, and your decision making are, the better you'll be able to deal with what happens in your subconscious mind. You'll make better choices. You'll know how to go about doing it so that your subconscious mind doesn't control you.
Mm. So going back to loss and grief, would the subconscious, let's say, emotion or idea be attachment and the inability to let go?
It certainly can be. Absolutely, yeah. Because especially if, again, if we believe that we are physical beings as opposed to spiritual beings, it can, yeah, absolutely. It can be that you just cannot accept that this physical being is not there any longer.
So then how do you help people to reprogram their subconscious, so to speak?
One of the things that I do with people who are ready is I guide them through a meditation, get their bodies and their minds very relaxed. And I guide them through a meditation in which they get to spend time again with their loved one who has passed away.
Mm.
And each person who has been willing to do that, while they had their eyes closed and they were having the experience, each person, a single tear would drip down their cheek. And to me, that was like a printed receipt that contact had been made. And they said, each person said it was very healing for them to have that experience. Not everybody wants to do it that way. Some people are a little bit more physical, and EFT works better for them, emotional freedom technique. But the thing I think that for which I'm the most grateful is that I am, where a lot of people are very uncomfortable when somebody is mourning, because after a time they want to say the thing or do the thing that's going to bring the closure. But with mourning, there is no closure. And so approaching the person from that knowledge can make it a lot easier for them. Sometimes just being there for them, allowing them to cry and just sitting there with them and not saying anything can be very comforting.
Mm. Have you ever experienced with maybe a client the inability to let go?
Sometimes it is very difficult. Some people really, in a sense, they because they come to define themselves by this loss and their subconscious mind is in charge of that and is telling them, this is who you are now. This is like your name. This is how you look. You are in mourning. Sometimes it can be very difficult, but generally speaking, if people are willing to do the work over time, it gets much better. I was working with a client the other day who said that she felt much better after we've been working for probably a year together, and specifically because she was in mourning. And she said after the session, I always feel better after I speak to you. And it meant the world to me because she doesn't always, when when she starts the sessions, she's usually not feeling very well. So it was wonderful feedback. I really enjoyed hearing it.
I love that. So is there ever there's no time length or period for mourning, take as much time as you need. But would there be an unhealthy amount of time? Say if someone took 10, 15, 20 years to mourn the loss of someone.
Yes, I would say if that's the case, definitely therapy would be the much better option than just trying to handle it on your own. Some people become obsessed with it and they really cannot allow their minds to take in this new information that the person is no longer there. It, when I think in terms of what's healthy and unhealthy, I normally think more in terms of less in terms of time and more in terms of how they're living their lives. Are they able to continue living their lives? If so, that's already an improvement, If they're just, I can't get out of bed, it's just too much, and this is 2 or 3 or 4 years later, then yes, they definitely should get some kind of therapy.
Mm. So typically when you meet your clients, they come to you about at what stage are they? I guess if we looked at the grief, what is it called? There's a list.
The 5 stages of grief.
5 stages of grief. Yes. Typically, what stages are they?
The interesting thing about the 5 stages of grief, those were shared in the book On Death and Dying by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And this book was first published in, I think, the late 1970s, maybe earlier than that. And her goal, I believe, in sharing those stages was not so much to say that every single person is going to pass through every single stage. She had mostly interviewed people who were terminal and knew that they were dying. And these were things that she had noticed. But as far as the people who come to me, it can be it can be that they have all of those stages, the anger, the denial, the bargaining, all of those things. It can be that they maybe are stuck in one mostly. And of course, not all of my clients are grieving. Some come to me for other things in their life. But some people look at those stages and they think as long as they go through every single one of them, I'll graduate at the end. And it's really not like that. And I don't think Kubler-Ross ever intended it to be taken that way. Everybody's different in the way that they respond.
Wow. I love that. I love that you touched on that because a lot of times, and that's my point that I wanted to get to with the 5 stages of grief, is that people think, okay, once I go through all of them, then make it to acceptance that I'm going to be okay. But you're still feeling this deep turmoil, this tugging at your core. It's no, I finished everything. No, that's not how this works.
Absolutely. Yeah. You are a very observant young man.
Thank you. Miss Brett, since we only have a few minutes left, is there anything you'd like to leave with the audience before we go?
I can be found online at relieveyourmind.com. I have published 2 books on natural healing, and I'm currently working on my third, and those are all mentioned on my website. And I wish everybody positive energy and enormous wellness, and it was just delightful speaking with you. Thank you for contacting me.
Awesome. Thank you, Miss Preston, for coming on. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Onion Soup. And if you have any issues with any grief or loss, and you or just want to reach out for any other reasons as far as hypnotherapy or looking for Reiki, please reach out to me.
Thank you so much.
Have a great one. Bye.
Thank you, you too.